One of the most common piece of advice that I got when I first started about 15 years ago in my filmmaking profession was you should fake it till you make it. And at the time, I didn't really understand how to apply that. What do you mean? What should I fake exactly? And when do I know that I made it? So there was a bunch of different situations in my career where I thought I was applying fake it till you make it. And sometimes it backfired so bad that I have nightmares to this day. And sometimes it worked out perfectly. So I put down 3 different stories that I think are going to be very relatable. If you ever thought about, should you pretend like you're bigger than you are, or should you fake it till you make it in your situation? And this could be relatable to freelancers. It could be relatable if you're running or want to run your own video production company. So let me share those stories, and hopefully you could either avoid some of the things I did or repeat some of the things that I did that worked correctly. The first story was in my career early on as a DP, and not so early on. This is maybe 5-6 years in my freelancing career as a DP or cinematographer. And I got an offer from a producer, a friend of mine, and basically there was this music video, a high-end music video, probably high 6-figure budget music video shooting in Chicago. And most of the crew was coming in from LA, but they did not have a Steadicam operator. Now, as a cinematographer, I bought a relatively decent Steadicam, or what I thought was a decent Steadicam rig. It was called a Steadicam Flyer. I don't think they make it anymore. And, it was like a $5,000 Steadicam rig. Except I would mostly use it on my own shoots. I would never sell myself as a Steadicam operator because I wasn't really trained as a Steadicam operator. So I would really avoid telling people I do Steadicam. On my own projects where I had full control from pre-production to post-production, I used a Steadicam all the time. But I never hired myself out, or I tried not to, as a Steadicam operator. So what ended up happening is I told this producer, I did my best to tell this producer that, hey, I'm not the best Steadicam operator, but I have a rig, I could do the job. And I tried to kind of get them to understand what I'm capable of. Well, either I did not communicate correctly, or somewhere something got lost in translation. But when I showed up on that shoot, it was ridiculously far more big budget than I had anticipated. And my skills were not anywhere near what the music video needed. So they needed to do low mode and all kinds of different running shots with the Steadicam. And what I lacked with my Steadicam experience was I just couldn't keep the horizon. Basically, you want the horizon to be level and not kind of look crooked. And I just couldn't get it right. And the director was yelling and the DP was yelling at me. And I just remember it was one of the worst experiences that I had. But at the time when I took the job, I was like, oh, how bad could it be? I'll just pretend like I know what I'm doing, where I just didn't know. So when it's a skill-based thing, like doing Steadicam, I will never again fake it till I make it, because I just don't want to be in that situation where I just have no idea what I'm doing based on the size of the project. And this happened to me multiple times with different things. Sometimes I was doing live TV in the morning and using those cameras where the focus is on one handle and the zoom on the other handle. And I just had no experience doing that. So when you go live and you can't zoom and pull focus at the same time in a very live shot, it's very bad, right? And then you get yelled at over the headset. So things like that I always now avoid, or avoided since that happened to me. I will never fake it till I make it when it comes to skill-based things like doing Steadicam. I sometimes work with cameras I never worked with before, like the first time I worked with a Red or Alexa. I just hired a really good AC that just knew that camera well, so I didn't have to worry about the technical settings of the camera so much. But then after a couple of shoots, you get comfortable enough where you can manage it. But that was one of the first things I learned. The second story that I think you're gonna find very relatable came when I first started my video production company about 8 years ago. And we got this client who wanted a full animated video. This was like a 5-minute, highly produced animated video they wanted to do for tens of thousands of dollars. Now, the problem I had at the time, I have zero animation skills, so I had to bring on an animator and I could produce and direct the video from the post-production standpoint. But the problem was my animator bailed before we could even take the sales meeting, right? I had someone in play, they got booked up, they bailed. Well, the sales meeting was still the next day. So this is when I thought, this is a moment where I should fake it till I make it, meaning I should kind of set up this meeting in a way where we could get the client, then I'll figure out what to do to give them the video they're looking for. So what we did was we had another animator that worked for another company. Now they were on staff. They were not available to do this job. But I paid them to basically sit in the meeting and help us close the sale. And that's their reward, was they got paid for closing the sale with me. It was like a kind of a commission, but they weren't gonna do the job. And we never in the meeting really said that they were gonna do the job. But we made it seem like we had a bigger team. Right? It was me, a producer, and this animator. We sat there with the client, or well, they weren't a client yet, and we closed that sale without actually really knowing how to do that job. But I knew I had hired an animator before that, and I knew a couple animators that I could eventually get them. But in that short run of having just one day to basically set things up, I couldn't do that, right? So I had to fake it in that meeting, make it seem like we know what we're doing, close the sale, and then we were able to fulfill the project, and it worked out great. That became a repeat client for several years after that. Now to this day, I always tell people, if you don't know exactly how to close a project, just bring the people that can close the project. Anytime I do that now, I will actually hire the animator beforehand or pay them to sit in the meeting with me, but now I just use the actual animator after we close the project. If we don't close the project, they still get paid. That's just part of the process of trying to get clients. But I remember thinking after we closed that project, wow, that actually worked. This time I faked it and it worked. We kind of faked the meeting and we got the client. So in those cases, when you have a company, I think it is appropriate to do things like that, where you sort of fake it and you put things together and figure things out after the fact. And the third story is kind of related to my filmmaking side of things. So for a long time, I would make documentary films. I spent 8 years making a feature-length documentary film, pretty much the first 8 years of my career that got released back in 2016. And in the process of figuring out how to make a documentary film, basically I followed the exact same path as Fake It Till You Make It from some of the other experiences I had, which was, in some situations, people are not going to give you permission to shoot somewhere if you seem like you don't know what you're doing, right? I was kind of a kid right out of film school. How am I going to convince these big hospitals to let me shoot a documentary film that wasn't backed by anybody? Eventually, I got Kickstarter funding, and that helped with funding the post-production end. But the production end, I self-funded, and I had some help from some other people too that helped me along the way. But I had to completely fake what I seemed like I knew every time I talked to someone in PR or in media at a hospital. Basically, this was a lot of this documentary took place inside of different hospitals. Now, it's really hard to shoot at hospitals. To this day, that's one of our specialties. We do a lot of health care related type of videos. But back then, I had never shot in a hospital. I didn't know any of the rules. For example, you can't really plug in lights in most cases in a hospital. And at the time, there were really no battery operated LEDs, right? I needed to plug in the lights to do interviews. So just to convince people, what kind of lights can I be bringing, what kind of equipment, what kind of crew, where can I film? All of that, I had to completely fake basically. I did a ton of research beforehand, so every time I had a conversation with someone, it seemed like I had done this ton of times before. So that's another thing I learned from that experience, is if you do your research and if you build up enough confidence that when you talk to a client, or in this case, a hospital media person to get permission to shoot in the location, if you sound like you know what you're doing and what you're talking about, you're far more likely to get in. Except I didn't know what I was talking about, so I did research, and research included talking to other people. To this day, I help a ton of people when they ask me, hey, how do you do this? If a friend of mine, a producer, is looking to shoot in a hospital, lots of times they called me because I've shot in 50, 60 different hospitals now in the last 15 years. I know the roadmap on shooting in hospitals. I know what to say. I know how to talk to these people. I didn't then, but I pretended like I did, and it worked out to my benefit. So from those 3 different stories, I sort of learned that when it comes to closing a sale, when it comes to getting a client, when it comes to getting permission, as long as you make it seem like you know what you're talking about by doing your homework and your research, you could actually fake it till you make it. But a lot of times when it comes to technical expertise, this could be in post-production, pre-production, and production, I will definitely not fake it till I make it, because in the case of the first story I shared, I burned that bridge with that producer by basically making them look bad because I couldn't handle the job. So what I recommend to you is kind of the same thing. When it comes to expertise in the technical arena of filmmaking, take what you're comfortable with or slightly above what you're comfortable with, but don't go so far above what you're comfortable with that you're going to have one of the worst days in your career. But when it comes to getting clients and the business side of things or getting permission, you should definitely try to do your homework so you could fake it till you make it and get the right permission or the right client. And eventually, in most cases, it should work out to your benefit. If you're new to this channel, I do create these type of videos sharing my personal experience in my career. And I also really focus on teaching filmmakers how to make money in the world of filmmaking and how to create their own video production company so their time is not always directly related or tied to how much money they could make. So if that sounds like something you could benefit from, make sure you subscribe. I try to make these videos twice a week, and I hope to catch you on the next video. Thanks for watching this one.